Dr. Ellen Langer, author of The Mindful Body. Absolute pleasure and privilege to meet with you, and thank you so much for agreeing to do this today. You are famous for being called the Mother of Mindfulness. It's a term that's bandied around an awful lot these days. But I want to find out at the outset what your definition of mindfulness is, because it certainly isn't being in the moment, and it's not about meditation.
Well, it certainly is being in the moment.
What is?
But it's about the way to be in the moment. You know, people tell you, be present, be in the moment, and it's sweet, but it's an empty instruction. Because when you're not in the moment, you're not there to know you're not there, right? So the way to be present is to actively notice new things. It's so simple, it almost defies belief when you recognize all of the consequences that follow from this very simple process. Actively noticing. And what happens is that when you notice things about things you thought you knew, you come to see you didn't know them as well as you thought you did. Everything is always changing. Everything looks different from different perspectives, but we tend to hold them still. And everything in our world teaches us to be mindless unintentionally. You know, whenever you're looking for absolute facts, what you're doing is assuming that this information will stay the same across context. And even for the thing that people think they know most well, it's like, how much is one in one? So how much is one in one? We tell me.
Well, the argument, the normal mathematical argument would be with 1 and 1 equals 2, but
right.
I presume
and people, well, because you've heard me talk about this before, I'm going to have to come up with a new example. Now I say to people, and they all know that it could be 2, but it could also be 1. If you add 1 cloud plus 1 cloud, 1 plus 1 is 1. 1 pile of laundry plus 1 pile of laundry, 1 plus 1 is 1. And as I argue, in the real world, 1 plus 1 probably doesn't equal 2 as often as it does. But let's just imagine that after we're speaking today, somebody comes over to you and they say, Matthew, how much is 1 plus 1? You're not going to mindlessly blurt out 2 anymore. You're going to pay attention to the context, and you're going to answer more mindfully that it could be 2. Now, the important thing to recognize is all the facts we've learned tend to ignore changes, depending on context. And so I was a straight A student, the one you hated to knew all the answers, right? But this was very important to me. It changed my life. I was at this horse event, and this person had asked me, would I watch his horse because he wanted to get his horse a hot dog? Well, I knew absolutely horses don't eat meat. I was taught horses are herbivorous. So I'm trying to be kind to him rather than snicker at little silly requests. And I say, sure, I'll watch your horse. He goes, he gets the hot dog, he comes back, and the horse ate it. And then I realized everything I thought I knew could be wrong. And in fact, the students who didn't do as well in class were probably better that night because they hadn't learned all of these false absolutes. But so now many people would be upset when they find out everything they know could be wrong. I'm bizarre, I know this. To me, I was very excited because it meant that everything that I thought couldn't be, maybe could be. So it was exciting to me to think that all of the things that people think can't be, possibly could be. And, even if you take something like brain damage, where people for so long believed, that's it. Once the brain is damaged, the game is over. Well, how can we know that? Why couldn't parts of the brain regenerate? Why couldn't parts that were not damaged take over the function of those that were? And and that would lead me, if I had brain damage, which somebody say I did, to proceed differently rather than just give up. So let me go back to your original question. I'm going to go in circles, and hopefully it'll all be clear by the end. But you said, so what is mindfulness as I study it? And I've said that it's actively noticing new things about the things you think you know, and then you realize you didn't know them as well as you thought you did, and your attention naturally goes there. Now, another way for this to come about is to recognize that we don't know anything. And since so many of us pretend we know everything, this is a harder thing to grasp. But if you do this, noticing the things you think you know often enough to see you don't know them, you come eventually to the conclusion that everything is potentially new. Everything can be understood in multiple ways. So you start off with the idea, which is uncertainty is the rule. It's not the exception. It has to be the rule because things can be understood in so many ways. Things are changing, and it's our minds that hold them still. And this opens up again for me enormous possibility. So many, many years ago, we did research where we made people more mindful, older people, and they live longer. And so that was kind of strange to me. How do you get from this fuzzy thing called a thought to something material for the body? And the world didn't tell me. Now, everybody out there believed in mind-body dualism. You have a mind, you have a body. And to me, all I wanted to know is how are they connected? And then I realized, because I didn't accept that everything I had been taught had been correct, and mind, body, these are just words. What if we put the mind and body back together and see it as a single thing? Well, then, wherever you're putting your mind, you're necessarily putting your body. And that opens up enormous control for us. People believe that, for example, when they have chronic illness, what they take that to mean is they have no control over it. There's nothing that can be done. Well, it turns out science can't prove that nothing can be done. Science can only show you that what you tried didn't work. Right? And science only gives us probabilities, maybes, not absolutes. Now, if you put the mind and body back together, when you have one of these chronic illnesses and your mind is in a healthy place, what we find is eventually your body is also in that place. We've done many, many studies. Let me give you an example so people have a flavor for what I'm talking about. Way back when we did the original study, which is called the counterclockwise study. Now, Matthew, I can tell you this is a famous study, not being immodest, because if you watch The Simpsons Go to Havana, they actually talk about the study. Right? So what we did was to retrofit a retreat to 20 years earlier. And we had elderly men live there as if they were their younger selves. So they spoke about past events in the present tense and so on. So in all ways, we put the mind back to that earlier time. As a result of this, in just a week, their hearing improved, their vision improved, their strength, their memory, and they looked younger. Now, think about it. Prior to that, I had never heard of an older person's hearing improving without any medical intervention. And there was no medical intervention that could improve hearing except, the use of a hearing aid and so on. So this is kind of remarkable. And again, saying, well, why do we believe that as you get older, you just fall apart? And we expect that. And so as we, in some sense, see ourselves falling apart, we don't do anything about it. A simple example of this is, let's say you're 20 years old and your wrist hurts. Well, people don't believe that at 20 they're falling apart, so they do something to make their wrist stronger. But if you were brought up believing as you get older, the game is over, all you do is get worse and worse, and then your wrist hurts, you say, so that's life. I'm old and this is going to happen. So you don't take that simple step. And then eventually what happens is the 20-year-old's wrist is fine and yours isn't. But that doesn't mean it couldn't have been if way back when it first started to hurt, you took some steps. So that's separate from, the simple idea of a mind-body unity that speaks to the issue of control. Let me just give you two more examples. We have so many in the mindful body. I have so many studies on this mind-body unity. Each one, I think, itself is interesting. But the next in this series, I won't go through all of them, was with chambermaids. Okay, so it turns out if you ask chambermaids, do they get any exercise? They say no, which is crazy, right? Because all day long. They're exercising. But they think exercise is what you do after work. And they're just too tired after work to go to the gym. So all we did was take these chambermaids, divided them into two groups, and we taught one group that their work was exercise. Because you have one group now that believes their work is exercise, another group that doesn't. We find they're not eating any differently, they're not working any harder, any differently. Nevertheless, in a short period of time, the group that now changed their minds about what was happening, changed their mindset, lost weight. There was a change in waist-to-hip ratio, body mass index, and their blood pressure, simply from changing their room. Let me give you, we'll skip all the ones in between, which were so interesting, I found. So the last one we did, we inflict a wound, minor wound, because we're not sadists. And even if we were, the review groups wouldn't let us do that to people. So we inflict a minor wound. And we have 3 groups of people. Unbeknownst to them, the clock in front of them is rigged. So for a third of the people, they're watching a clock that's going twice as fast as real time. For a third of the people, they're watching a clock that's going half as fast as real time. The third group, it's real time. And the question we're asking is, does that wound heal based on clock time in real time, which is what most people would assume, or our perception of the passage of time? And it turns out that the wound heals based on perceived. We have people in a sleep lab, they wake up, they see the clock, they think they got 2 hours more sleep than they got, 2 hours fewer, or the amount of sleep they got. Again, biological and cognitive functions follow perceived sleep. Studies like this. And we have lots of evidence from other areas and work that we've done that show this mind-body unity is a meaningful way of understanding ourselves that, again, yields enormous control. So let's say you and I take an IQ test, and you get a 70, which means you're normal, and I get a 69, which means I'm cognitively deficient. Now, you don't have to be a statistician to know there's no meaningful difference between our scores. 69, 70, I couldn't sneeze, misread the question, a number of things. But now you're in the normal group, I'm in the troubled group. If we come back to us and give us tests, let's say 3 months later, the first we start up, we're not different, but because of a label, we now organize ourselves differently, engage in different activities, and so on. Down the road, I will be cognitively deficient while you stay normal. So if we do this now, we call this the borderline effect, and we do it with disease that, before the medical world can declare you have a disease, they give you all sorts of tests. So, and no matter how many tests and how they put the answers to this test together, you get some people who, just at the borderline, are told they have the disease, and those right beneath those are told they don't have it. So they're the same at the start. But what we find is down the road, and not that far down the road, let's say with diabetes, or it would be true with any disease, they split apart. And those who are given the diagnosis manifest the symptoms of the disease. It's remarkable. There's so much that was exciting to me in writing this book, and realizing what we can control, not just our health, everything about ourselves. And when you think of mind-body unity, that says not just we can control our bodies, but everything our bodies do is affecting our moods. You want to ask me a question?
Well,
let them speak now. You ask one question and I go on.
Oh, no. That's what these interviews are all about. It's great to hear you talk in depth. Reading this book, actually, particularly the parts involving healing, reminded me of, I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Jeff Rediger. He's a psychiatrist.
Yeah, sure.
And he wrote... He wrote a terrific book a few years ago called Cured, where he looked basically at people's perception, their
remission.
Yeah, exactly. Spontaneous remission and placebo effect and all of that. And it feeds from the same source in that people's perception of themselves and their illness and their optimism can actually give rise to these incredible cures. Well, what seem to be cures.
That.
Yeah.
You know, the idea of mind-body unity actually explains spontaneous remission. So let me tell you a personal story that dictated lots of my research for the next many decades. My mother had breast cancer. She was 55, I think, when she got it. And the cancer had metastasized to her pancreas. So that's the end game, right? And so the medical world just wrote her off. She's in bed. They're not exercising her legs or anything because, after all, they're expecting any moment she's going to die. Then magically, it was gone. And the medical world couldn't explain it. And that was part of why I did the research I did over the next several decades, was in order to explain it. And I think that, I don't remember just what Jeff said, but the spontaneous remissions are seen as rare. And I think that probably not. You know, if you imagine that you have some disease or whatever, and you're supposed to die, and you decide you want to die, in your own home, in your own bed, and then whatever you have goes away. I don't think the first thing you're going to do is call your doctor and say, you were wrong. So the medical world doesn't get that information. And then you have all the people in remote places who have tumors. They don't even know they have tumors, and the tumor goes away. We have no idea how likely spontaneous remission actually is. And from my perspective and my work, it seems to me one is always better off presuming that, in fact, whatever they have can go away. And the reason for that, you can still make a will and take care of those things in case you die. I mean, when people die, people should do that anyway, perhaps. But my feeling is, as long as you're alive, you should be living. And too many of us are sealed in unlived lives. So that I get calls all the time from people who were just diagnosed with some dread disease, and they're angry and they're depressed. And what I say to them, among other things, is that if it were I, and I thought that I had, let's say, 3 weeks to live, I don't think I would waste my time being angry or depressed. First thing I do is I go have a hot fudge sundae and then just go about living as much as I could. Now, the advantage of this, which I said at the very beginning, but probably not clearly enough, is that if I'm going about living and I'm mindful, I'm taking in new things, I'm enjoying myself, the neurons are firing, and decades of our work shows that that's actually literally and figuratively enlivening. So by doing the full living, you're helping yourself. But even if you weren't, I think people are spending a lot of time now, because there are so many baby boomers and people older, trying to add more years to their lives. And what I recommend instead is add more light to your years. And that will probably also work to extend your life. And how do you add this light? Simply by knowing you don't know. And then everything is potentially exciting. And it's very different from meditation, which is fine, which is different. Now, when you meditate, what you do is close yourself off from the world, sit quietly for 20 minutes twice a day, and that often leads to post-meditative mindfulness. Meditation itself isn't mindfulness. For us, it's an immediate thing, and it doesn't require practice, and it's effortless. So if you were going to visit me in my home, you've never been here before, you wouldn't have to practice anything. You'd walk in and you'd say, oh, yeah, did she do that painting? What books is she reading? Why is there a tennis racket here? You would just notice, and it would be fun. And that's why vacations are fun. We're spending money to enjoy ourselves, so we, look for new things. So just to say, when I say to people, we should be mindful all the time, they shudder because it sounds exhausting. Except being mindful is what you're doing when you're having the most fun. So it's so easy. And, just some of the consequences, it's not just that you're healthier, you're happier, you're seen as more charismatic. The things you do end up bearing the imprint of your mindfulness. There's no downside and so many upsides.
It's interesting. You'll probably agree with this, but I've heard other people say that the whole reality or notion that life seems to move faster when we get older is based on the fact that we experience fewer novelties as we get older, as opposed to when we're younger, when those years, 3, 4, 5, 6 years of age, when everything is new, everything is novel, and life seems to move a lot slower when we're younger because we're exposed to all those new experiences and they make an impression on us.
Yes, but, when you're having fun, time goes by very quickly. And when you're bored or stressed or unhappy, it seems to be endless. And you're only bored, stressed, or unhappy as a result of mindlessness. So, and I think that as you get older, many people become naturally more mindful. You've experienced so many things that you see, it's not such a big deal, right? That you and I have a fight. Okay, so you're young. You worry, are we going to make up? How is it going to affect your life? So on and so forth. You get to be my age, you've had fights, you've had good times, bad. You see, it's just nothing. And it's sort of as you get older, I wrote something about this years ago. You're 2 years old and you're falling to scrape your knee and you're screaming bloody murder as if the world's going to end. And then you're in elementary school and it's Valentine's Day. And Johnny or Janie doesn't send you a Valentine. Oh my God, you can't bear it, right? And and then you're a little older, you're an adolescent, and you get a pimple, and no one is going to ever care about you. You're never going to be attracted, and it just then you get to a point where, that most of these things are transient. Most of them don't matter. Most of them even have an upside, and that all allows you to be more positive and more mindful.
Going back to medical diagnoses, I know you're not a fan at all of probability, particularly when it comes to giving somebody, for example, who presents with stage 4 cancer, giving them the diagnosis that they only have 6 months left to live. You're not a fan of that at all.
Well, it's not that I'm not a fan of probability. I mean, probability is as good as any other discipline. What I've spent a lot of time trying to make people understand is that most of the things that we've learned were just probabilities. Science only gives you a probability. It says that if you were to repeat this exact same experiment, the same way, which you can never do exactly, but let's assume you could, that means you're likely to get this result. That's often translated in textbooks by physicians, parents, teachers as absolutes. So it's not most horses under these circumstances don't eat meat. You learn horses don't eat meat. You learn this disease is incurable. You learn things that the data shouldn't permit us to learn because they're saying maybe. Now, if you knew that you had something, you might have it, and it might not be cured in standard ways, versus you do have it, and it's incurable. I think a normal person would orient themselves differently. If I want to do something, and the world tells me it can't be done, many people are just not going to do it. If I want to do something, and the world says, well, we don't think it'll work, then you say, well, why not try? And so this is the approach we've taken, and we have incredible findings with lots of so-called chronic illnesses. The word chronic, for example, just means that the medical world doesn't know how to fix it. It doesn't mean that there's nothing that we could do. Now, I came to this just recently. It's mind-boggling for me that it took me so long, but I spent all this time since 1979, before that, trying to get people to appreciate mind-body unity. And only the other day, I realized people don't even appreciate body unity, that you're one body, so that means if you hurt your arm and there's nothing that can be done for your arm, but since it's one body, if you build up the rest of you, that's certainly going to make your arm stronger. And then, a little thought experiment. Let's say you compare an Olympic athlete with a couch potato. Couch potato gets no exercises, eating all the wrong things, and so on. All right. And you expose both of them, let's say, to COVID. I don't think they'd be equally likely to get it, but let's assume they both got it. I don't think their experience of it would be the same, even though let's say at the time we didn't have any cure for COVID. So what I'm saying to make it clearer is that there's always something that we can do, and knowing that turns out itself to be good for our health, because when we believe we're helpless, again, the system starts to turn itself off because we become more mindful. If you don't think there's anything to pay attention to, the system's turning itself off. If you believe, it's your maybe out there, then you keep yourself busy looking for it.
Can we talk about another subject in the book, and that is the subject of predictions? Can you speak to me about...
I can. This one is more complicated, but people believe that they can predict. Now, the medical world believes they can predict because they take these probabilities and make them absolute facts. So in the example you gave me before, that doctor should be shot, maybe, literally, but, for saying you have 6 months, so there is no way of knowing. Let's go back to the, start for me. My mother was not supposed to live, another 2 weeks. And then the cancer is gone. They don't know. So probabilities, when they're made into absolutes, we make predictions based on them that we shouldn't. Okay, so now, in a more general way, people are very good at post-dicting. What I mean by that, the common expression, is Monday morning quarterbacking. After the fact, it's very easy to draw a line to show, it had to be. Going forward, we have no idea. So let's say you and I are at a party, and we see Susan and Peter fighting. And at that moment, I said to you, Matthew, are they going to be divorced? You'd probably say, who knows? How can you predict? Sometimes people fight. But let's say we don't have that conversation. Now, a week later, after the party, I say, Matthew, Peter and Susan are getting divorced. I knew it. You should have seen the way they were fighting. All right. So going forward, we don't know. Looking back, we make it seem that you could have or should have known. Now, science can predict for the group, which is very different from predicting the individual case. So let's say you were going to bet all your money. I'm going to have a foul shooting contest with Michael Jordan. Okay. Now, if we shoot lots of baskets, surely he's going to win. However, would you put all of your future earnings and whatever you have invested at the moment, that at this moment, when he shoots that foul shot, and I shoot it, but he's going to win. He sometimes misses, I sometimes get it in. A different example that I've used a lot. Let's say we go to a Mercedes dealership. You have 100 cars. Now, if we say we're going to, start them, most of them are going to start up right away as soon as you turn the key. They're good cars. That's what people paying a lot of money for. But would you again bet your life savings that any of these, let's say 100 cars that we chose at random would start as soon as you turn the key? Let's say probably not, because there are lemons, right? Not everything is perfect. Not every perfect car is perfect. Not every perfect athlete is perfect, and so on. And so the point is that while we can predict for the group, people mistakenly think we can predict for the individual case. So let's say we know most people who take this drug get better. That doesn't mean if you're given this drug, you'll get better. Most people whose cancer has gotten to this point don't live beyond 6 months. Does not mean that you yourself won't live beyond 6 months. You understand? So, and really when it comes down to our health, our individual lives, all we really care about primarily is us. It's nice if most people like this thing, but will I like it if I do? I learned this when I was a kid. I remember being dissuaded from taking chemistry because, all the people I know, it's hard. It was my favorite course. If any of us think about the ways we're different from other people, those are the examples of not being able to. Oh, here's one that may persuade people. You go shopping, you go food shopping. Okay, what you're doing is trying to predict what you're going to want to eat for the week. And how many things you end up throwing out at the end of the week. All of those were mispredictions. A fun story for me, my ex-husband, when, very young, he was in the Army, took ROTC, I think, to avoid Vietnam, but whatever. So he's in the Army, and I go to a commissary. This was before, I believe, things like Costco, BJ's, these Sam's Club, these discount places exist. And I love the bargain. So I go into the commissary, and I buy, because we're going to leave soon, this tour is over, I'm going to buy all the stockings we can buy. Because in the commissary, they were half the price in the stores back home. Okay, I didn't have that much money, so it wasn't massive amount, but I bought many of these to save money. 2 weeks after we were home, pantyhose came. I don't know if this is a woman's thing, but you realize when pantyhose was invented, people stopped wearing stockings. Okay, so I bought all these things for thinking that it will be good forever. Anyway, prediction is an illusion. Well, where do you want me to take this? Because I can go in many places.
Well, I was just going to ask you if predictions are part of the anatomy of making a decision. Yeah. What is the relationship between predictions and indecision and not making a decision?
Yeah. Well, okay. So decision making is another thing that I think we've got all wrong. And we have all these decision theories. Most people believing that you should do some kind of cost-benefit analysis to decide what to do. So you have, let's say, two outcomes here, the advantages. And when you think about it deeply, it makes no sense to do a cost-benefit analysis. I'll get to prediction in a minute, because each cost is potentially a benefit. Each benefit is a cost. Benefits, costs, good, bad, are in our heads. They're not in events. So if I said to you, do you want to meet my friend Susie? She's very impulsive. You decide no. If I said to you, do you want to meet my friend Susie? She's very spontaneous. You say yes. Impulsive and spontaneous are the same thing. Do you want to meet Ellen? She's very gullible. No. Do you want to meet Ellen? She's very trusting. Yeah. Okay, so if every good is bad and every bad is good can be seen, then you can add them up to tell you what to do. Now, when you're looking at trying to decide between two things, let's say, should I go to Paris or should I go to Rome? You're making a prediction that the time you were last, let's say, in Paris will feel the same as now. And the time you were in Rome would feel the same as now. Or what people say would be the same now. You're predicting, and we've just said prediction is an illusion. Okay, so the third part about decision-making, that's crazy making, is that people think they should take in information to pull apart the alternatives. But nobody tells you how much information you should consider. And any new piece could change the decision. So, should I go to Paris or Rome? If I've never been to either case, for me, psychologically, they're the same. And if I said to you, Matthew, do you want A or B? You wouldn't spend a lot of time thinking about it, right? What is A? What is B? All right? So if the alternatives are the same, it makes no difference. And as soon as you see the ways the alternatives are different. Let's say you find out A is $100 and B is $10,000. There's no calculation. You're just going to take the $10,000. All right, so it's so different from what people think they should be doing, what people are told to do, that I'm sure people have to read the book to fully understand this. But let me give people the bottom line, and then you can ask me to clarify something that was not so cool. I say, rather than waste your time trying to make the right decision, which you can't predict, because good and bad is the essence of choice in your head, not in the outcomes. That rather than waste your time trying to make the right decision, make the decision right. So in my classes, decision-making classes, I'd have people, I said, spend the week now not making any decision. Use some random little game for yourself. Flip a coin or decide you're always going to do the first thing that comes to mind. And then next week we'll discuss how it felt. And they come back the next week, and it was a wonderful week because it was stress-free. Because decision-making is stressful for most people, right? So if you want to decide, should you take this job or this job? There's no way to know. There's no way to know how the job is going to be experienced by you. Should I have children or should I not have children? You can't live a life first with children and live a life without children and then say, that one was better, whichever, right? So as soon as you're making a decision, you make a decision to behave differently, to go forward in life. And as soon as you do that, it changes the equation. You can't experience both of the things. Or, you have two choices. You can't experience both of them and then figure out which one is better. So it's always a guess. But you can always, always control your experience of whatever the decision is.
Well, this then allows us to foster a much healthier relationship with regret, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you for asking it. That regret suggests that you could have known. So let's say you're making a decision should I go to Harvard or Yale? And you decide to go to Yale, and you don't like it. So then some people, I should have gone to Harvard. The implication is that going to Harvard would have been better. It could have been worse. It could have been the same. And whatever we decide, now this is an important piece that often gets lost for people. We make a decision, whether we do it by this random method, whatever it is, but we do something because it makes sense to us, or else we wouldn't do it. If we're not aware of why we're doing it, then later, when there seems to be some consequence as a result of doing it, we take ourselves to task. How can I have been so stupid to have done this? And it's again as if we could have the consequences at the beginning. So, it's interesting because I'm saying we can't know. And the important piece is to recognize we don't need to know. Once you recognize that, let's say stress is not a function of events. Stress is a function of the view you take of an event. If you're mindful and you see this can be understood in so many ways, there's always an advantage to it. And so, so let's say with us right now, we're speaking, I'm having a good time. And let's say all of a sudden the internet goes out. I'll still have a good time. Then I'll go eat lunch, which I'll enjoy. No matter what happens, there's a way to enjoy it. We're not a victim of circumstances. And then when we realize that we can control our experience of events, we don't need to control them in the same way. If you think, I have to have this because otherwise I'm going to be miserable, or I can't get involved in that because it's going to be awful, then we're stressed, not realizing the experience of it being miserable or wonderful is essentially in our hands.
Okay, so let's break it down then to brass tacks, as they say, on a day-to-day basis. Then, because you have said that most people actually go through lives in a mindlessness way.
Yeah.
They're not even aware that they're doing this, living mindlessly. How can we, on a day-to-day basis, from hour to hour, live more mindfully?
Okay, so it's easy when you're learning something new, because the way to learn it is not, this is the way to do it, but rather, this is one way. So if you learn this is the way, and then you get older, or let's say you're playing tennis and you break your arm, then you can't do it that way. Most people would think then you can't play. For me, when I hurt my arm, I started playing with my other hand. So I'm just gotten myself lost. So the way to be mindful. So what I'm saying is, when you're learning something new, learn it mindfully. Learn that there are many ways you can do it. Pull the tennis room, whatever it is you're doing. Okay. But how do you change all the mindlessness that we've already been taught? And it's very hard. My book on becoming an artist deals with it. But I think maybe the first thing is for people, whenever they're unhappy, whenever they're experiencing the regret you talked about, whenever they're embarrassed, whenever they're fearful, those are the times we start paying attention to ourselves. And at those moments, we can open it up more broadly and just ask yourself, how else might it be? When you're stressed, most people don't stop and think about things, but stress requires two things. First, it requires a prediction that something's going to happen. And we've just said you can't predict. Second is the belief that when it happens, it's going to be awful. Okay, so you're stressed. Now ask yourself, this thing that you're so worried about, what are 5 reasons it may not even happen? And you immediately feel better. And it turns out, Matthew, that most of the things people worry about never happen. And what you can do is ask yourself the last thing you were stressed about. Did it end up happening? And if it happened, was it terrible? And the answer is almost always going to be no. So if you look past how you dealt with these things, it gives us some information going forward. But now, the more interesting part I find is, let's assume this, quote, terrible thing does happen. How is it actually an advantage? So you're stressed that the person you're with is going to leave you. Well, that's a killer for most of us. But you must realize, it would be good to realize that a relationship requires 2 people. And if the other person isn't there, you're in a terrible relationship to start. So the loss is not so good. And that means that then you'd be free to get into a more meaningful relationship with somebody else. Okay, so what I'm saying is, when you're stressed, you say to yourself, why might this thing not even happen? You feel better. If it happens, what are the advantages? You feel better. And if you feel better, if it happens, it doesn't happen. If we were together, Matthew, and I'd say, you want to say, where do I want to have dinner? I don't care. I'm going to enjoy myself no matter what. What movie do we want to see? I don't care. I'm going to enjoy it no matter what. You end up so powerful as soon as you realize you're not a victim of circumstances. And that's what so much of this book is about, is how everything out there is mutable. Everything out there can be changed by us. But we have to recognize that that this is the case. And I speak oftentimes to women in this regard, because if let's say I'll be giving a lecture, and at this point I'll look in the audience, is there a really tall man or a really tall person? There's almost always, for some reason, a 6'5" guy. I invite him up to the stage. So there I am at 5'3", standing next to him. Right. We look silly, right? And then I simply raise the question, should we do anything the same way? It doesn't seem like we should because we're so different. The example I often use, and I don't know if this is a good one or not, but imagine we're both sitting on the same toilet, not at the same time. But biologically, one of us is not getting our needs met. So the point here is the more different you are from the person who designed the activity, the more important it is to realize you can do it in a different way from that person. And that everything we learn should be, yeah, this is one way. There are other ways of doing it. And that leads us to feel better about ourselves, to have more successes. And it's the same thing with our health. The medical world says this is the case. We need to translate that as this is also the case. The sports world says this is the way you hold the tennis racket. If you're not 6'5" and your hand is not as large, you should hear it as, well, this is one way of holding the tennis racket. And amend things so that it works better for us, so we can better meet our own needs.
Well, as you've been talking there, I was just thinking that one of your central beliefs, and you outline this in the book also, is that, and we've spoken about it already, is that the mind and body are unified. And I'm just curious that you mentioned there the medical world. Are we any closer to them accepting that philosophy going forward?
Okay, so it's interesting. Not that many years ago, I'm going to say a couple of decades ago, the medical model believed that psychology was irrelevant to disease. I'm sure doctors and nice people want you to be happy, but that was just separate from the physical health. And the way you were going to become sick was only with the introduction of an antigen, pathogen. Now, most medical people believe, yes, psychology matters, and there's study after study that comes out to show you how stress is bad for your health. So yes, people, I'm sure there are still some diehards who believe mind and body are distinct and the mind has no effect over the body. But I'd say most believe they're related, but by not seeing them as one, you end up with the problem. How do you get from this fuzzy thing called a thought to something material called the body? And so they're not likely to recommend psychological treatments. Now, as you know from the book, we have this treatment for all sorts of chronic diseases that I call attention to symptom variability. And that's just a fancy way of saying being mindful. When you're mindful, you're noticing change. And as soon as most of us are given a diagnosis for some chronic illness, we don't think there's going to be any change, except things will get worse. So it's either going to stay the same or get worse. But, nothing moves in only one direction. When the stock market is doing well, it doesn't go up in a straight line, right? It goes up and it goes down a little, it goes up. Same thing when it's falling, right? So when you realize that your symptoms are changing, which now you might pay attention to and you weren't before, you can ask the question, well, why? Why now is it a little better or a little worse? Okay, so we take people who have chronic illnesses, and we're going to ask them, we're going to call them periodically in the course of a week, and ask them, how is the symptom now? Is it better or worse than before? And why? That's the important question. Because by asking why, first of all, you're going to do a mindful search of potential. One is why now is when I'm not hurt. Because I had Cheerios for breakfast and who knows. But each of these is mindful. Mindfulness itself is will for your health. And finally, if you're looking for a cure, you're more likely actually to find it. Okay, so, imagine that you're very stressed and you're doing this attention to variability, and you think you're always stressed. Nobody is always anything. Is the point of this, right? But when you're not stressed, you're not thinking about your stress. So that's how you end up thinking you're always stressed, because every time you're thinking about it. Now, you call it every day. How is the stress right now? Is it better or worse than the last time we spoke? Throughout the day, throughout the week, and you just discover, when you're talking to Ellen Langer, that's when you experience the most stress. Okay, so as soon as you have that realization, you have the cure, right? Stop talking to me or talk to me differently. So we take people who have arthritis, chronic pain, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, a host of real things. We call them several times during the day. We ask them, is whatever the symptom, is it better or worse than before, and why? And we get remarkable effects across all diseases. And the good thing about this is that there's no negative side effects. So you try this, and what happens is, when you have a chronic illness, lots of people just feel helpless. And helplessness is bad for your health, but even if it weren't, who wants to feel helpless? So now you're back in control. Maybe there's something you can do. The doing of it ends up feeling good because it's mindful. And mindfulness is, the essence of engagement. It's what we're doing when we're happy. And you very well may find a cure.
If you don't mind me saying, you seem to be the living embodiment of all of the learning that you've taken from your experiments down through the years. You have such a healthy and positive outlook to life.
Thank you for that. And I was told that I marked the edge of the optimism continuum. But people need to realize that, the optimist, this is the way the world is. It's not that, I'm seeing, and pessimists think that, no, it's all awful. I think that if you have the choice, if you see a glass as half empty, you spend your time being thirsty, worrying about, the negative effects it's going to have on you. If you see the glass is half full, you go about living. And in that living, you'll probably find another source of water. But there's something that is a little backward. People often ask me, have any of these, very extreme, I'd say, effects of some of my research changed my life? And you would think it would, except by and large, it's my life that dictates the thought in the first place. So an example, one that's the most fun for the mind body. This book, by the way, The Mindful Body, started off as a memoir. So there are lots of personal stories. One of which is, I was married when I was very young, and we went to Paris on our honeymoon. So now I was 19 going on 30. Very sophisticated, the woman of the world. We go to dinner, and I order a mixed grill. Among the things that's going to come on the plate is pancreas. I don't think I can eat it, but now that I'm so sophisticated, I think for some bizarre reason, I have to eat it. Any married woman would eat it, okay, any adult. So it comes. My then husband was more sophisticated than I, and I asked him which of these things on the plate was the pancreas, and he pointed to something. So I ate everything else with gusto. Now the moment of truth. Can I eat the pancreas? I start eating it, and I literally get sick. He starts laughing. And I say, why are you laughing? He said, because that's chicken. You ate the pancreas a while ago. So 19 years old, I saw how you can make yourself sick. Then at, let's say, 28 years old, I saw how one could be diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and how it can magically disappear. So I pay attention to bizarre as much as I can in my life that, interest to me. And then I say, is this true only for me? Am I misunderstanding it? And then I put it in a study to see if there's a more general truth to it.
Well, I can tell you the book is a great read. It's full of life lessons, to be honest with you. So I'd recommend it for anybody. It is called The Mindful Body. Dr. Ellen Langer, absolute privilege to have you on the podcast. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, man.